I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Nicole Angel, Director of Business Partnerships for Sustainability at Actera. Welcome, everyone, today. We're very excited to have you here. I am absolutely thrilled to have this wonderful panel of speakers here, and I'm going to introduce Bonnie, our panel host. Bonnie Powell is the Director of Communications for Bon Appétit Management Company. Bon Appétit, incidentally, is the winner of a 2016 Actera Award for Sustainability through our Business Environmental Awards program. Before joining Bon Appétit, Bonnie was the food editor of the environmental news magazine Grist. She was also deputy editor of Edible San Francisco and co-founder of one of the very first food politics blogs, The Ethicurian. And Bonnie and Andrea Valenzuela of Bon Appétit are responsible for the amazing plant-forward meal that you will soon be enjoying. So I'm very excited about that. But first, we're going to tell you a little bit more about the plant-forward diet. And Bonnie is going to welcome our exciting lineup of speakers.
Hey, everybody. We're excited to have you here, and I want to just correct that it's not just a plant-forward lunch we're having, it's actually a plant-based lunch. And I believe there's a definition of the difference between those two terms in your program, and we're going to get into that a little bit more in this panel. So our first speaker is Katie Cantrell, to my left here. She's the founder and executive director of the Factory Farming Awareness Coalition, which educates people about the ecological and social justice hazards of industrial animal agriculture. And she's also the U.S. program manager for Green Monday, which partners with FFAC to bring sustainable plant-based options to institutions across the U.S. And she's going to kick this off for us by talking more about the environmental impact of our diets. Thanks, Katie.
Yeah. I'll jump right in. As National Geographic described, when we think about threats to the environment, we tend to picture cars and smokestacks, not dinner. But the truth is, our need for food poses one of the biggest dangers to the planet. Within the food system, there is one sector in particular that has an outsized impact: animal agriculture. In the US, there are more than 9 billion land animals bred and killed for food every single year. So there are more farmed animals in the United States than there are people on the entire planet. Most of the environmental problems stem from the sheer number of animals required for hundreds of millions of Americans to eat meat every day, often with every meal. Where do all of these animals live? 99% of them are raised on factory farms, spending their entire lives confined in cages or pens on industrial facilities, a far cry from the old McDonald-type pictures we see on products at the supermarket. What are they eating? Primarily corn and soy. In the Midwest, what used to be prairies and marshes are now corn and soy monocultures as far as the eye can see. And these crops, by and large, are not feeding people. They're feeding the billions of animals raised on factory farms. Meat production is also the leading cause of the Amazon rainforest being cut down to make grazing land for beef cattle and land to grow corn and soy to feed to farmed animals. So meat production is also a leading driver of wild animals becoming endangered or extinct as their habitat is destroyed. And of course, this is also devastating for the planet, for climate change. Growing all of this feed and raising all of these animals also requires tremendous amounts of water. This is an ad that my organization ran on BART a few years ago. You can save the same amount of water by skipping 1 gallon of milk or 27 showers. And everyone would prefer that you shower. The same is true of a hamburger. Switching from a hamburger to a veggie burger just one single time, you save as much water as if you did not take a shower for an entire month. So this is one of the single most effective ways that we can save water in our daily lives. So all of this water, all of that corn and soy, also hormones, pesticides, antibiotics, are given to those animals, goes through their system, and comes out as poop. Manure runoff is a leading cause of water pollution in the United States, from the Central Valley in California to the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. All of this poop also releases nitrous oxide, a greenhouse gas 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Which brings me to the final issue, climate change. The United Nations found that meat production creates more greenhouse gas emissions than all of the planes, trains, and cars in the entire world. A recent study found that the top 5 meat producers combined emit more greenhouse gases than ExxonMobil, Shell, or BP. So cutting meat is one of the most effective ways to cut our carbon footprint. For example, the Environmental Working Group found that if Americans ate no meat or cheese just 1 day a week, it would be like taking 7.6 million cars off the road. Now, what seems more realistic, convincing millions of people to sell their cars and never drive again, or getting people to eat plant-based just 1 day per week? Another study found that if Americans replaced beef with beans, the US could immediately realize up to 3/4 of our greenhouse gas reduction goals as set out in the Paris Climate Accord. So what this is saying is that without spending billions of dollars building new energy infrastructure, without passing contentious new laws through an impossible Congress, we can get most of the way to our climate goals just through changes in our diet. Now, despite all of these studies, only 6% of Americans recognize that reducing meat consumption is an effective way to fight climate change. Many leaders and organizations have shied away from discussing the impact of diet because it can be seen as radical or judgmental. But at a time when people are increasingly frustrated and disempowered by national politics, food can be framed as a tremendously easy, positive, and empowering way to make change. That's exactly what Green Monday strives to do. As you see here, we emphasize that there's no one right way to eat more plant-based foods. Every little change adds up. We work with institutions like businesses and schools, both in the US and internationally, to foster change through supply and through demand. So we work with dining to expand plant-based offerings on Mondays and to expand plant-based offerings throughout the week, and on Mondays to feature those as the Green Monday special. So we bypass the controversy and negative stereotypes that can come with words like meatless or vegan and emphasize that this is a very effective way to go green, which is, of course, very popular among businesses, among college students in particular. At the same time, we work with student groups or with employee green teams to encourage their peers to go Green Monday by buying or bringing a plant-based lunch. So it's not just a top-down initiative, but it's also bottom-up. We really aim not just for dietary change, but also for cultural change, empowering individuals and institutions to realize that by joining together to make small changes in our diets, we can truly help save the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie, and great job at staying under your 5 minutes.
Thank you.
So we're giving you kind of a 360-degree view of plant-based diets, and our next speaker is Skivington, who is currently the Vice President of Healthcare Continuity and Support Services at Kaiser Permanente, which you're all familiar with, I'm sure, where his responsibilities include nutrition services. So he recently served as the national team leader of a team focusing on ending homelessness for the medically frail and elderly, and he's going to talk to us about the role that food can play as medicine, including at Kaiser.
Oh, thanks. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Oh, come on, man. We're in San Francisco. We're at
morning.
LinkedIn. We're talking about something I can tell is passionate with all of you, because I can see it in your faces. I can tell it. I can feel it in the energy. So let's try that again. Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, that's much better. So thank you. Any Kaiser members in the audience, just by show of hands? Oh my gosh, look at that. So great. Thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for that. You help pay for my bills every month, but I hope you're getting good service. And if you're not, come see me afterwards. We'll work on that. I'll be your expediter for that. All right? I promise. Now this is squeaky, so I tend to walk around.
Sorry, can we have skip slides?
Oh. Yeah, I have 8 hours worth of material, but we got to do it in 5 minutes, and I think I can do it. But what we have to do is you and I are going to go back in the Wayback Machine, and I mean way back to Hippocrates, because he famously said, "Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food." We at Kaiser Permanente have taken a sustainable journey, and it goes back into the Wayback Machine as well. But remember when we started the Thrive campaign, the award-winning Thrive campaign, because when you use the term Kaiser Permanente, you can't avoid the term Thrive. It's part of our brand, it's part of our identity. It's what we want to do for you as our patients, our members, and the communities that we serve. because even though we insure almost 13 million people, we operate in cities that have populations around 65 million. And we look at everybody in our community as part of our family, as part of our impact area, as part of people that we include in our mission, which includes the sustainability journey as well. So if you remember, and I'm going to jump around in my slides. So you remember this billboard ad? This was one of the original campaign items. And I just spent a week in Canada talking to our brothers and sisters north of the border because they're moving along in their journey as well. It's a little slower, and I'll talk about that in a second, but there's just as much passion amongst pockets of people within the country. But remember, and I didn't know if this would translate, but they all finished it with me. Remember the nursery rhyme when we were kids? I scream, you scream, we all scream for ice cream was it, and they all got that as well. But remember, we switched that paradigm and we created this, we scream for green beans. Very catchy, but you can see the intersection between food and health. And that started all of this. And it got even better when we went to one of the next campaigns, and the marketing group did not talk to the nutrition group when they came up with this idea, but we stand for broccoli, very famously put into our print media and the commercials as well. True story. About a month before that ad ran, we were getting a ton of complaints by patients that we were serving broccoli. Because remember, now we're going way back to the 80s when President Bush 41, famously declared he hated broccoli. No one could make him eat broccoli. And I think that took in the American culture for a while. And there was a lot of complaints. So being responsive to those complaints, we removed broccoli from the patient meals. And Bob probably remembers that, because especially up in Northern California, our food service partner provides those patient meals. As soon as that ad ran, guess what the patients wanted to have? Broccoli. Why aren't you serving broccoli? And I bring that up only to show the power of suggestion, the power of marketing, the power of media. So we've got to leverage that as we go forward in our collective journey to move to a more sustainable diet. Just a real quick idea of why we do this, because we want to do things that make a difference in your lives, in your family's lives, in your communities. We want it to count, and then we also want to be accountable. And we'll talk about how we're being accountable, and I think in a very big and bold way. Just really quickly, you can see, I already talked a little bit about that, but one of the other early initiators of connecting food with health was the fact that a couple of just voices in the wilderness, physicians who believed in healthy food and the connection it has to the mind, body, and spirit, they wanted to put a farmer's market close to where the patients were. So as of today, we have over 55 farmers markets embedded into our facilities. So you probably see them if you go to one of our main campuses that has those. So incredibly powerful, where a powerful image where we bring the farmers to the patients. There's a lot of education interaction, and it just continues to grow and snowball. So it's those little things that make a huge difference in the long run. The other area that I wanted to leave you with, and where we think it's a bold move, is that we've declared as an organization by the year 2025, and we did this in 2015, we declared that 100% of all the food that we purchase and serve in our facilities will be sustainable. Did we have a clear path and to understand how we were going to do that when we made that goal? 3 years later, I can sit here and tell you, I don't know how we're going to get to that goal at 2025 still. I can only tell you that we've moved the needle. We're now hovering just under 40% of our food is sustainable. So we still have a significant gap to go. But just like when President Kennedy declared in 1960 that they were going to land a man on the moon by the end of the decade, they did not have a clear path. They did not have the technology or the science behind them yet. But it was one of those moments in our history that was needed. And we've done the same thing, and not just the sustainable food area, but in a lot of other areas that'll be talked about throughout the climate summit over the next few days. So that's the Kaiser journey. Love to talk to you further about it, so I'll stay around after the panel.
And we should have time for questions, everybody, too.
Okay.
Thank you, Skip. Our third speaker is Sophie Egan, who's the Director of Health and Sustainability Leadership, as well as the Editorial Director for Strategic Initiatives at the CIA, not that one, the Culinary Institute of America. And among her responsibilities, she co-directs the Menus of Change, which I'm sure you've all heard of, a joint initiative with Stanford University. Menus of Change seeks to foster a healthier, more sustainable future for the food service industry, including by focusing attention to protein choices and helping to make plant-forward dining a mainstream concept in the culinary profession and the food service industry. And I think you have a handout here of some of the Menus of Change. It's the
Protein flip, yeah.
The protein flip. And Sophie's going to give us an overview of what all of that means.
Great, good morning. Can everyone hear me? Great. So yeah, thank you, Bonnie. Just a quick clarification. I am Director of Menus of Change, the sort of mothership, which I'll get into, and I'm the co-director of the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative, which we lead in partnership with Stanford University, and you'll hear much more about that. So I'm here representing the work that we do with the Strategic Initiatives Group, which really is a thought leadership body for the food service industry, and I lead initiatives to try to help the industry make its menus healthier and better for the environment. So the part of the problem that we're trying to solve is improving the options that are available to diners when they're eating away from home. And that's everywhere from K-12 school food to campus dining to corporate dining to fast food chains and beyond. The flagship program at the intersection of human and environmental health is Menus of Change. And at the core of Menus of Change are 24 principles of healthy, sustainable menus. What's really groundbreaking about the principles are two things. One is that they're evidence-based. It's informed not only by our close partnership with the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, but by a nationwide advisory council of leading nutrition and climate scientists. It's also integrated. Again, I said that intersection of human and environmental health, and that's very unprecedented. So this is the one-stop shop. Everything you need to know is sort of a roadmap for how to design your operations. The framework has been widely adopted. This slide is a little, it's not showing the logo, but the framework has been adopted not only by Compass Group North America and Google Food, but actually 55 colleges and universities as part of that Menus of Change University Research Collaborative. So we're really just so invigorated by the extent to which this has been taken up by the industry. And you'll hear more about this as I mentioned, but what's really exciting for all of you in this room is that through the collaborative, we're actually identifying, scaling, and exporting the most effective strategies for shifting diners to healthier, more sustainable habits. And the way that we do that is by using campus dining halls as living laboratories for behavior change. So the protein flip, which you all have a copy of, has really been a multi-year focus for us, protein, in large part because of what you've heard today about the outsized impact it has, not only in terms of the burden on natural resources, but in terms of the outsized impact on chronic disease risk. So encourage you to check out this resource at menusofchange.org, and also a companion resource that was created by chefs all across the country in that collaborative. I'm going to share briefly 3 sub-strategies that really comprise the protein flip and what we mean by that, to try to concretize this a little bit for you. So one is the idea of blending. This can mean not only dramatically improving the craveability of standard veggie burgers, but really recognizing the opportunity to offset a percentage of ground beef in traditional hamburgers with ground cooked mushrooms. a huge number of dining programs all around the country have actually now shifted to this as the default. They no longer serve a 100% beef burger. And you can just imagine the impact at that scale. It's lower carbon footprint, lower water footprint, lower in sodium, lower in calories. And guess what? It tastes better. Consumers report that they actually like it more. It's juicier, it has the umami because of the mushrooms. There's depth of flavor. The 100% beef starts to seem a little boring. Not to mention it costs the restaurateur or the operator less. So it's clearly a win across the board. A second strategy is what we call meat as a condiment or meat as a garnish. And this is really the protein flip in action. This is flipping the ratios from the standard value proposition in a dining experience tends to be the T-bone steak that's so big it's spilling off the edge of the plate, and actually just leveraging the flavor from animal protein. 2 ounces can go a long way, but really having the meat play second fiddle to the vegetables or the whole grains in a dish. And while this is kind of a novel concept for most Americans, this is actually just second nature in countless cuisines all around the world. So you can take inspiration from everything from 2 ounces of ground beef in a bolognese ragu to 2 ounces of beef topped on a broccoli stir fry. And the third and final sub-strategy is the menus of change principle that we call moving nuts and legumes to the center of the plate. And this is really about this whole untapped world of discovery waiting to be really taken advantage of by American palates that relates to pulses. And if you think about it in the US, there's maybe 1 or 2 household items that really are central, that really have pulses as the center. Hummus, maybe the kid classic of peanut butter and jelly. And really we're missing out on a huge array of flavors and diversity of ingredients. So, everything from curried lentil stew to Moroccan chickpea tagine to black bean enchiladas and chipotle crema. I mean, you name it. So, looking forward to seeing some of that during lunch. Encourage all of you to check out more resources at menusofchange.org as well as moccollaborative.org. Everything from recipe ideas, menu concepts, far more depth on the scientific evidence as well as the business case for plant-forward menus. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sophie. Our last speaker before we dive into the questions is Miyoko Schinner. She's the founder and CEO of Miyoko's Kitchen, which makes award-winning organic dairy alternatives that you can find all over here in the Bay Area. She's the author of 5 cookbooks, the former host of Vegan Mashup on PBS, and she's on the board of the Plant-Based Foods Association. And she's going to give us an overview of the plant-based meats and dairy substitutes and the demand for them.
Good morning, everybody. Will the slides be joined? Okay, there we go. Well, I'm really excited about the future. I know everyone talks about, it's gloom and doom about climate change and everything, but I think there's so many exciting things happening. In fact, I really think that the future is plant-based. So let's talk a lot about it. When we think about meat, what do we typically think about? Where does it come from? Well, we think it comes from, cows grazing in the grass. But it's quite clear from what you just heard from all the other speakers that the future of meat could very easily come entirely from plants. What about dairy? Well, that also comes from little Daisy in the backyard. But could it also not come from nuts and legumes and all sorts of plant foods? In fact, that's the direction we're headed. All the trends indicate that. Let's take a look at this case that I saw at Wegmans in Massachusetts. There were 3 doors of cheese made entirely from plants. That's what retailers are saying is happening in the marketplace. All these cheeses are made from, well, coconuts, nuts, legumes, pulses, and what about all these other dairy products? Is it time to perhaps start thinking about dairy products as not only coming from animals, but plants? Instead of thinking them as alternatives, maybe we should think of them as plant dairy versus animal dairy. Let's take a look at all these products. Do they look familiar to you? Do they look every bit as delicious as the animal dairy products you've had? Whether it's pizza or ice cream or milk or butter or an array of fancy cheeses, you can get it all made from plants, and they're all available now. These are not dreams of the future. These are existing products, and they are going to increase even more. Let's take a look at meat. You want a barbecue? You want a grill? You want a juicy steak? You can have it all, whether it's made from legumes or pulses or wheat or vegetables, mushrooms. There is such an array of ingredients that are being introduced into fully plant-based foods that you can incorporate them once a week, twice a week, serve them to your aunt. She'll never know, I guarantee you. All right, well, what does Meat and Poultry magazine have to say about the future of plant-based? They say it looks really, really bright. We're talking about the industry. We're talking about the industry. In fact, the National Meat Council actually says that we have to encourage innovation in this area. Now let's talk about how are consumers responding. Right now, 43 million consumers are now incorporating plant-based foods in their diet. And when I'm not talking about just vegetables, I'm talking about what you would call alternatives, milk and dairy-like products. We're talking about over 15% of the US population. And what's really exciting about that is of that population, 86% of the people are not vegan at all. They're just everyday people, flexitarians, omnivores, foodies, people that are just interested in experimenting with other forms of protein. All right, well, let's take a look at how much money do they spend. The average person who buys plant-based food spends 61% more money than your average shopper. So if you're interested in getting into an industry that's generating a lot of money, this is it. This is the future, and this is why it's trending in that direction, because people follow the money. This is where the money is. Let's take a look at the growth in plant-based. 18% growth last year. Look at organic, look at gluten-free. They're not growing as fast. In fact, they're going downhill. All right, well, what is the number one reason most people are beginning to eat plant-based foods? It's remarkable, but it's actually taste. People say they prefer the taste of almond milk. I went to Pete's this morning. I asked the barista, how many people are now ordering plant-based milk? She said it's now over 50% of customers. Now, this is Corte Madera. It might be different in Montana. I don't know. But that is the direction. People are buying plant-based foods because they think it tastes better. But in order for plant-based foods to maintain the momentum, we have to keep innovating and creating more and more delicious foods. Look at the investments going into plant-based. Tyson is invested in Beyond Meat. Nestle bought Sweet Earth. Look at all these investments. They're following the money because they see the trajectory of plant-based foods. There is a dairy in New York, upstate New York, called Elmhurst. It was one of the largest dairies in New York. They decided to jump ship. They got out of the dairy industry, and now they're making nut milks. They reinvented themselves, and every single animal agriculture producer can do the same. So if you're not getting involved in plant-based, if you're not serving it at your restaurant, you're leaving money on the table. Think about that. Thank you very much.
So we talked about a couple of questions that we wanted to bring up, and then we'll turn it over to you guys. And I think Miyoko really addressed this in that last bit, but I'm going to ask her just to reiterate it. Are plant-forward diets enjoying is it a trend, or are we actually seeing a cultural shift this time?
It's a cultural shift. It's here to stay. It's simply not sustainable to keep eating the way that we have been eating. I think people are getting on board. If you just think about where we were 10 years ago, whether trends are moving so fast today through social media. If you think about 10 years ago, how many people drank almond milk? Now, over 64% of all households have both non-dairy milk and dairy milk. Or let me just use my own nomenclature, plant milk and animal milk. So this is a movement that's across the globe. I've traveled to many, many countries. Wherever you go, the word vegan is what is used in Europe predominantly, as well as Asia, Japan as well too. And this is what people are all talking about it. I can't tell you how many Uber drivers say, wow, I just saw this movie called What the Health, and I'm thinking of going vegan. So,
Sophie, do you see that amongst the chef community too, or?
So I would argue that we're still in the education phase. I mean, I do think there's a cultural shift brewing, but we work especially in the middle of the country as well, and this is not top of mind nearly as much. Certainly there are signs like you mentioned on retail especially, but if you just look at the ubiquity of, say, even vegetarian or vegan menu options, we're so far from being there. Still, in terms of proportion of entree options, for instance, that happen to be, again, vegetarian or vegan, or that are using meat as a garnish or meat as a condiment, it's very slim. It tends to be that you have fewer choices if you're eating that way. And so there's sort of stigma, there's a sense of that you're depriving yourself. And the other thing that really persists that I see especially is that the value proposition is still really not being made. For those who are often making the choice, again, in a restaurant or food service setting, it's often the expectation that those options should cost less, that a vegetarian entree definitely should not be the same price as one that has meat. And so we really have a long way to go, I think, in getting that consumer perception to value the technique behind it, the ingredients, the sourcing, the whole range in the same way that historically we have for animal-based options.
Great. So Bon Appétit surveyed our guest population 2 years ago, and we got about 4,800 respondents. This is at corporations and universities. And over 50% identified as either vegetarian, vegan, flexitarian, or conscious carnivore. So it's more than the majority of they wouldn't say they were vegetarian, but they would definitely say that they were, maybe they wouldn't say plant forward, but they're just thinking about how many animal products they ingest. And Katie, what about for you? Do you think this is a trend or a shift?
It's here to stay. It's a shift. And we see that both with corporations and with schools. You can think about, as Miyoko mentioned, the awareness of vegan. Think about sustainability. 10 years ago, people were just starting to use that word, and that certainly wasn't just a fad. People are more and more concerned, especially as the effects of climate change become ever more dire. It's becoming harder to deny that is a serious problem that we need to address. And as I mentioned, this is really one of the most accessible and empowering ways for people to make a difference. You don't have to spend tens of thousands of dollars on a hybrid or putting in solar panels. Renters don't even have that option. So this is a way that everyday people can do something that leaves them feeling empowered, and that that's not something that you do once or twice and then forget about it. Really, in addition to all the health benefits, it's a win-win. So people stick with it.
Skip, what kind of resistance do you encounter at Kaiser when talking about plant-forward diets? What are the misconceptions that people have around it from a dietary perspective?
Well, and no different than the general population. You all see it, hear it, feel it. You know what I'm talking about. But we've kind of tried to not convert necessarily and use a phrase that I think is applicable. We meet the patient where they are. And we look at it, what we've talked about. It was really representing a spectrum. But I agree with everything I've heard, everything I've seen, all the data suggested that we're moving as a society more along that spectrum to plant-based. The evidence is overwhelming. So there'll be people that'll say, not now, not ever, will I switch from meat. But you're not going to convince them. So if they're going to be that rigid about it, then but they won't stop this tsunami wave that's occurring, because it's not just you and I, it's not just our families, it's the next generation and the generation behind them that are just going to move this to an inevitable conclusion. And if we don't do it from a health perspective, and that's one of the arguments, not arguments, but one of the conversations, as I mentioned, with the Canadian folks, because they're struggling with this. Because every time this issue came up, it was all about cost. And I said, then reframe the discussion and look at it from a planetary perspective, because we just can't continue to go down the path that we've already started generations ago. So we got to shift. We're shifting now, and it's an inevitable conclusion in my mind.
What are some of the other pain points and resistance that you encounter, Sophie?
Yeah, there are many. So the biggest one, I think, is the American obsession with protein and a lot of misconceptions about protein intake. So one is that there's a misconception that we need more protein than we do, that we get less protein than we do, and also that you can only get sort of the optimal types of protein from animal-based foods, in particular, red meat. none of those things are true, but there are, everything from protein water and, just the sheer ubiquity of labels that emphasize this sense that if you don't get enough protein in a day, you're going to bonk or crash and so forth, really creates a lot of anxiety. And so often we see resistance to the sense of, well, how do I know that there's, if I just eat a salad or if I just eat a grain bowl, there's this sense of like, I'm not getting my protein for the day. And this is especially a pain point with athletes, in particular on campuses where performance is really a big part of a student athlete's identity, especially if they're very competitive. So that's an area where there's an especially large amount of meat consumption. Another big misconception and pain point is satiety. Just, there's sort of this like, perhaps it's a little bit gendered, but this sense of like, if I just eat a salad for lunch, I'll be hungry later. So that, again, this not only the protein part, but just in terms of the total and the abundance that can be provided from plant-based foods. And the last one I would say is that I really see, especially in restaurants, this sense that vegetables especially can't be indulgent. So there's a chef, John Fraser, who spoke at the Menus of Change conference year before last, and one of the things he said was that he has two main issues as a restaurateur. One is that when people come into his vegetable-centric restaurant, Nick's, in New York City, they order less overall. They order less, wine. They order less dessert. They have the sense they have to be on their best behavior versus vegetables being celebratory or something to treat yourself. So you really have to overcome that in terms of elevating its total perception, I would say. And part of that relates to even just wine pairings. There traditionally is a history of wine pairing with meat, and so in the restaurant experience and in really pushing people to not just see this as the thing you're supposed to do, but the thing that you want to do. Those are some areas that we're continuing to work on.
Miyoko, how do you overcome that idea that plant-based foods are health foods? They're not like craveable and thing. I mean, I think it's a misconception, but how do you overcome that?
Oh, I think we've come such a long ways. I mean, I remember when I first went vegan 30 years ago, I had a choice of eating lentil loaf or lentil loaf. But we've come a long ways, and people are beginning to think outside the box. In fact, I think most people who actually choose a plant-based diet find that when they do so, that they start to think outside the box, they become more creative, and they start eating a wider range of foods than they ever did. Most people are stuck eating the same foods every single day. And when you start to explore the huge array of plant-based foods, you find that all of a sudden, oh my gosh, your diet is so varied. There's a lot of innovation going on right now, not only in retail, but actually among vegan chefs and non-vegan chefs as well too. It's not just celebrating the vegetable, that's great, but you can also do a lot more substantive stuff with things that have umami like mushrooms and legumes and grains. And I really just think that, yes, you're right, the majority of the country still isn't there. But it's just like, the Marriage Equality Act. That just 10 years ago, that was unthinkable. That's the law now. It doesn't matter where you are in the country. People are now okay with that. They're supportive of it. And I think that's going to be the same sort of momentum that's going to push this movement forward. Because there are more and more exciting foods coming on the marketplace every single day. That slide I showed you of Wegmans with 3 doors of plant cheeses, that was unthinkable 10 years ago. There was one product, and it was so rubbery that you couldn't, I couldn't stomach it. My dog didn't want to eat it. And today, the fact is, people are saying they prefer plant-based foods. The people that are eating it are saying that it tastes more delicious than the animal alternative. So this is an unstoppable movement, and there's going to be more and more exciting options. The other thing to think about is this is not a new movement. If you go historically anywhere in the world, most humans were plant-based outside of the aristocracy because they couldn't afford to eat meat every day. So if you go to southern Italy, there is such a huge range of delicious foods that celebrate pulses and vegetables, and people still eat that way. Most people in southern Italy still only eat meat, a few times a month. And they can eat delicious food based on plants. So this is not new. What we're doing is rediscovering the way humans ate for millennia. And we're going to make it even better.
Let's see if you guys agree. We can open it up to questions now. Whoa, lots. You in the striped shirt. I think there's a mic coming your way.
Plant-based diet my entire adult life. 30 years ago, I was teaching natural And there was a book called Diet for New America by John Robbins, and that was the beginning of my thinking a lot about letting go of dairy products. And ironically, his father started Baskin Robbins. And some of you might know this book, and it was a Pulitzer Prize winning book. And I would give it out to all my students, and I got them to eat nut butters and milks and soy. Now I'm really concerned about almond milk and how much water it uses. So I've been trying to figure out where in the spectrum of all these different, now there's hemp and oat and rice and soy and almonds, which ones is really, what is most environmentally proper or whatever to be using? Anybody have any opinions on that? Because look at all these
Katie,
products
why
that are
don't you
being
take that one?
created.
Sure. So switching from cow milk to almond milk, you are helping save water. So a glass of cow milk takes 30 gallons of water to produce. A glass of almond milk takes 23 gallons of water to produce. Now a glass of soy milk only takes 9 gallons of water to produce. So almond milk does use more water than other types of plant-based milks, but you're still making a beneficial change if you're switching from cow milk to almond milk. I haven't been able to find stats on like hemp, oat, or flax, but I suspect those are the most sustainable, both in terms of water and soil quality. I drink flax milk myself, and it's also great because it has omega-3s.
Bonnie, second question here.
Sorry, does somebody have the mic already?
In the back.
In the checked shirt.
Can I just add one quick
yeah,
thing? So we use a lot of cashews in our cheese, and I just want to point out, we did a study about the amount of water that would be used to make our cheese versus cow's cheese. And with 1 acre of land, we can produce 6,000 pounds of cashew cheese, whereas with 1 acre of land, you can produce 182 pounds of cow's milk cheese. And in terms of water inputs, cashews actually require no water inputs at all. They only grow in tropical climates, and it's just tropical rainfall. There's no additional inputs at all. So there's, that, and they live for 50 years and produce yearly.
Cool. I didn't know that about cashew milk.
So there seems to be some backlash from the existing industry. Apparently the government now says you can't call it milk unless it's not a bovine secretion.
Because almonds don't lactate.
Do you have any comments on whether this is going to succeed or where we're going?
Who wants to take that one?
Well, I'm a member of the PBFA. I'm a board member of the PBFA, the Plant-Based Foods Association, and we are actually going to be in DC on Monday lobbying against the Dairy Pride Act, which is what, and we've spoken to, we went there, we've been there a number of times. Missouri just passed a law that says you can't call anything that's meat that call something like a sausage or burger unless it comes from an animal. So there is actually a backlash, but the interesting thing is that those, the pushback is actually coming from farmers and ranchers. It's not actually coming from the industry that produces meat. In fact, the National Meat Council said, hey, this is not a good bill because it's going to prevent innovation. Because what they realize is that their members, like Tyson and ConAgra, are actually investing in plant-based companies. So while farmers and ranchers are getting the short end of the stick, and and meat sales are down and milk sales are down, the actual companies, for example, Dean Foods, which is one of the biggest milk companies in the world, owns White Wave, which owns Silk. So it's not to their advantage to lobby against the use of words like milk and cheese and meat. So it's going to be interesting. The FDA has always had the standards of identity, which says that, which says all these things, but they've never had the manpower to enforce it. The FDA says there's going to be a commenting period that's coming up very shortly. And then they plan to actually rule on whether or not they're going to start enforcing it. So that is coming up very, very quickly. But they're actually getting a lot of pushback from the industry, not the plant-based industry, but animal industry as well. It's just the farmers and ranchers are opposed to the future of plants.
I didn't realize that. You guys have anything to add, Sophie?
Just one thing, I was actually at the Good Food Conference last week. I think a couple people here were there as well, which was all about the future of plant-based meat and clean meat. And actually was speaking with the lawyer who is petitioning the FDA on this. And one of the things he said is that he feels very confident that part of why this will succeed is that it's the use of a modifier. So, plant-based meat, plant-based milk, plant-based whatever, if you think about the fact that we have grass-fed meat or any other sort of organic modifiers in terms of the way that we talk about the names of words, there's huge precedent. So he seemed quite confident that that would sort of win out in terms of the argument.
Cool. I didn't know that. There's one back there. Okay.
Before I jump into my question for Sophie and Miyoko, I worked for Foster Farms for a while. That is the third largest dairy property owner in the West Coast. And while they see all the plant-based milks as a fundamental threat to their holdings, they're also the largest processor of almond milk. And this is primarily for Sophie and Miyoko. I know you both are familiar with coconut fats, Sophie, because of the article you did about Karen Michaels, and Miyoko because of your ingredients. I'm involved in a vegan chocolate truffle company that uses coconut fat as a base, and it's been a fundamental threat because of a lot of what Karen and others have been saying. I'd be curious to know what today's story is, both in terms of the health benefits or detriments of coconut fats, and also from a climate standpoint, when you're replacing dairy with coconut, how does that affect, positive or negative?
Sure, I can answer just briefly. So that's wearing my other hat. I write for the New York Times health section when I'm not working for the CIA. So I sort of busted the myth that coconut oil is, like the hero of the nutrition world. And mainly the research that we have comes down to saturated fat in coconut oil. And the question that has largely been posed is, should I be shifting to this as my default cooking oil? So by no means do I think that no one should ever eat or consume coconut oil, but just in terms of your daily, what are you doing all of your home cooking with, it has to do with the quantity of consumption. The other really important aspect of it is the health halo with coconut oil. So let's say that we all kind of know, maybe you use butter in moderation, but the perception that coconut oil is so healthy can also lead to just consuming it in such larger quantities. And this happens with a wide range of foods that have that health halo. We kind of give ourselves mental permission to consume in quantities that we wouldn't consume something that we consider more indulgent. So those are the two issues from a nutrition standpoint. I'm actually not sure on, maybe you know about in terms of the sustainability aspect. Obviously there's been a lot in terms of palm oil and other types of oil, but I haven't read as much on the coconut oil production side.
I'm in agreement with you. I don't think that coconut oil is a health food, even though we use it in some of our products, not all. We use it for culinary purpose. It provides a certain mouthfeel and texture that other vegetable fats don't provide. By no means is it a health food. I don't encourage people to load up on it. I think it's an indulgence. It's something that you enjoy once in a while.
Kaiser, Skip, do you want to weigh in on whether Kaiser has a position on coconut oil?
No, that's you're beyond. Would be beyond my depth there, so I don't want to comment.
Katie, do you know anything about the water usage of coconut?
I don't know the water footprint of coconut. I mean, most of the environmental concerns with coconut come from the transportation, so from shipping it. But generally speaking, production is where the bulk of the carbon footprint comes from with foods. So, but I can't say definitively how it compares to other types of plant-based foods.
I think we have time for one more question before our plant-based lunch. Over here.
Yeah, I'm just curious about, do you see any role for insect-based protein as part of the solution, or is the ick factor and the cultural taboos too much to overcome, or is it just totally unnecessary, or could it be part of the solution?
Wow, who wants to take that? Well, that's Katie.
I can speak to that. It's a question that comes up a lot when I'm speaking to different audiences, so I've done some research. And there's two issues with insect protein. One is that a lot of the products on the market nowadays are like cookies or flours, so people are adding even more protein to their diet. They're not replacing meat with insect, they're just adding additional protein that they don't need. So that's one issue. The other issue is that it's not actually more sustainable when done at scale. So they've looked at the protein content of insects, and it depends on what you're feeding them. So the cheapest way to produce huge quantities of insects, they end up feeding them corn and soy. And so you get the same inefficiencies.
Insect CAFOs.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. They're insect CAFOs. So at scale, especially at a level that you'd need to try to replace the amount of protein Americans are currently eating, it's not really much more efficient. It's about equivalent with like factory farm chicken.
Hey, what's wrong with beans and rice?
Great. Well, thank you guys so much.
carbs.
We are going to break for lunch now. We don't want you to have to rush through lunch, so we want to break on time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.